I want to turn now to our guest who's here in the studio. Hi, Mary.
Hello, friends.
Thank you so much for contributing to the conversation with Leonard. We invited you today because you've been one of the foremost activists here in the city of Atlanta, maybe elsewhere, on the Black Lives Matter movement. You've been able to really articulate, from my listening to you at many rallies and meetings, the real true impact of this struggle, and what it could portend. And so both Paul and I were excited that you were able to come today. So obviously yesterday marked 1 year since the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, followed by a tremendous resistance, popular resistance, an uprising, if you will, by the people of that area, but not just there, around the country, in response to decades and decades of most extreme oppression and violence at the hands of the state. And so now we're a year later, and so many more names have come up in terms of people still being killed by the police in the most egregious ways, from here in Georgia, Anthony Hill, Kevin Davis, Nick Thomas, we got Sandy Bland. They just have, it's just all over. So I guess we're going to ask you as how we want to start this conversation. First, you are with Song, Southerners on New Ground. Let us give you an opportunity to say a little bit about why you're in Song and what it does, and how that informs all the other work that you do.
Wonderful. And again, thank you for creating this space and allowing me to be here with some really great comrades. Well, Song is a, Southerners on New Ground is a 22-year-old, embarking on a 23-year-old LGBTQ liberation organization that has been working at the intersections of race and economic justice since the 90s, across the South in particular. And I was introduced to Song back in, I believe that was 2008 or 2009, something like that, when I first moved to Atlanta. And I was amazed by the work that they were doing and by the politic. I do consider Song my political home, just given the clear analysis around what it means to live at the intersections of race, class, gender, and sexuality, and how Song has walked it out in its history and in its current work, and how we approach our work in terms of the grassroots organizing, leadership development, working within coalitions and alliances. It's incredible, and we like to say that we're the dangerous homosexuals living in the South, and yeah, it's grounded my political views in a lot of ways, and has really strengthened my leadership. So I'm grateful to be a part of Song and to be a part of the membership that it has, and you know, yeah, it brought me into the front lines of this work, and which was one of the entry points into the Black Lives Matter work. Informally, I remember last year I was actually calling myself taking a vacation. And how can, you know, when the personal is political, it's hard to take a vacation, you know. And so when I heard that Mike Brown was killed, immediately folks began taking to the street. And so, you know, working with other organizations here in Atlanta, like It's Bigger Than You, the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, the Gen Y Project, and several others, Rise Up and different ones, you know, we began, you know, doing the rapid response actions and lifting up those here in Atlanta who had been harmed by police violence and murders, and that was through the fall and the winter. And then as the Black Lives Matter, that language was being used, the hashtag in terms of social media, there seemed to be a gap in terms of what level of infrastructure was necessary in these particular times to bring people together. So the Black Lives Matter founders, Alicia Garza, Patrice McCullers and Opal Tamale created this network and brought folks together to a table from different organizations, different activists, and Song was asked to come to that table, and myself was one of the representatives for it, and began thinking about what it is that this movement needed in this time. And so yeah, it has been just taking off since then. So yeah.
Well, in preparation for this interview, we, all of us, read an article that was on color lines that I'd urge people to look at, written by Barbara Ransby, who wrote this very important book on the history of Ella Baker. And the title of the article is "Ella Taught Me, Shattering the Myth of the Leaderless Movement." And I'm wondering if you could say a little about the what you've seen in terms of the role of structure and organization, and this concept that people have from the outside that there is no one leading this. In fact, she says it's leaderful.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. I think that oftentimes, I think because traditionally we look at, a sole leader to, whether it's the leader of the free world, the leader of a church and all this sort of stuff, that individual leader is oftentimes what people, look to see arise in these moments. And I think many folks, have learned the lesson that if we want to see leadership, we look in the mirror, and that we all have something very critical and valuable to bring to movement. And the organization and the structure piece, helps us to coordinate that leadership in order to move the work forward, right? And so I think what has been amazing is that folks who, have testified and said that before Ferguson, they were like chilling at the house, and then when Ferguson happened, they were able to, and they got mobilized, that they, got politicized, mobilized, and began taking action. And then I think that, just from what my temperature gauge, probably around by the end of the fall, I think many folks, if they hadn't moved into formal organizations already, I know many folks were beginning to craft, formal structures, whether it be formalizing and becoming a part of Black Lives Matter chapters and establishing those, or people joining already established organizations. But I think people who really wanted to be embedded in the work and see we want to do rapid response, and then at the same time, we want the structure and the guidance and, the accountability structures that helps move, systemic changes, whether it be around reforms or what have you. Oftentimes that work usually lies within the hands of organizations and groups. So when I hear people say that, I'm always like, oh, the leaderless movement. It's such a myth. It's such a myth, but it is a huge paradigm shift, given the way individualism in our country is, so embedded in us in a lot of ways, and to think about collective leadership and co-development and how, this takes all of us. It really changes the narrative in this particular movement about what's possible, especially when, it's not just depending on one person to lead a movement, but everyone has to put their hands on the plow.
If I could follow up on that, I think one of the things again it can be outsiders, and it may even be some folks inside who are concerned about the issues of accountability, issues of defined responsibility, and they don't see how that can be spread across, this really wide range of people who, as you said, have so many different skills and things that they can contribute, and that it isn't all focused on the one person who's the spokesperson. Could you talk a little bit more about how you've seen evidence of that here in Atlanta? Because I have seen so many incredible young women in particular, but people in general who have developed speaking skills, have developed all kinds of organizing skills, have done some of the most creative actions, some of the most bold actions. And none of that can be done just willy-nilly.
Right.
It has to all, and I'll raise in particular the action that many people may remember, when in October, a group of mostly women stopped traffic on 7585. Unbelievable piece of coordinated work.
Yeah.
Military precision. So let's talk a little bit about that.
I didn't sleep for days. I didn't sleep for days. You know, that actually started when a few of us went up to Ferguson during the weekend of resistance, and we talked about, you know, the big conversation leaving Ferguson. The call to action was, you know, you're here in Ferguson, but we know this is happening in every black community all over this country. And so the charge was, what do you want to do when you get home? And many of us, you know, that idea was pitched primarily because, little history, Pat Hussein, one of Song's founders in the 90s, her and the Song crew back then was protesting against the trying to make sure Cobb didn't get the contract with the
For the
Olympics,
because of their anti-gay position.
And one of the actions they did was they slowed down traffic using their cars. And we were going to actually redo that one in the spirit and honoring of, you know, the legacy. And then we were like, that's amazing. And then we realized we were working with all the young people who didn't have cars. So we ended up actually standing on the highway. But I think what came out of that, you know, folks were really serious about making sure that, you know, it wasn't a willy-nilly action, that we assessed the risk, that we collectively came together. People, you know, made decisions whether or not they wanted to participate. People took on different roles. We called in experts that, you know, that knew how to make this action happen or give the folks the training to do it. I mean, it was definitely a collective response of groups and individuals that helped make that happen. And I think, you know, more broadly, that was the first action that Song did with a few other, or Song members and a few other organizations, and their members did. And what came out of that, because we started doing more actions, we actually sat down and created principles that we wanted to uphold and to move in, you know, as we continue to do the rapid response. And so that's just like one example of one of the ways we were clear. You know, we were going to make sure that the work of black women, black, queer, and trans folks were not being invisibilized, that we, you know, were consistent in our messaging and not leaving anyone behind. You know, just really dedicated to making sure that we were walking out exactly what it is we wanted to see in the world more broadly, and knowing that it needs to start in the way we organize and in the way we move work together. So, yeah, that's one of the ways. And, you know, the accountability piece is always, you know, is always necessary, and one of the things that, you know, at Song we take seriously, and our organizers, you know, if something doesn't get done, somebody's like, yo, what happened? Who dropped the ball? You know, or even when we know that there's work to be done in some, because life happens, the state is consistently on our backs, you know, how do we continue to move the work to somebody else's hands, or divide the work so that it isn't, you know, just one person doing the work. And so I'm excited about, you know, the crew that we have, and the folks who are doing the work, and the people that consistently come in, so we can continue to model what collective leadership looks like.
Could you say a little bit about relationship building and the role that it plays? And I'm referring to a sentence in the article that Barbara Ransby says, movement building is forged in struggle through people building relationships within organizations and collectives. And the history, as I understand it, of Ella Baker and SNCC, relationship building was at the center of everything that she tried to do. Could you say a little about that?
Yeah, I think one of the amazing things about the South, and one thing that we know, is that the South doesn't have oftentimes as many resources as, you know, the New Yorks and the Californias. But one of the major and primary infrastructure that the South has is the resource of relationships. And so we center that in our work. You know, I think it's one of the organizing steps that, you know, oftentimes gets ignored, like the one-on-ones, and, you know, what does it mean to sit at someone's dinner table or on their porch and just talk, you know. And so we don't want to lose that element, because, you know, when it comes down to the struggle part, there has to be a level of trust that's built so that folks won't be liberal and allow someone to, make a decision or go along with the decision when, we know that we actually have to struggle a little bit in order for, to move work. And so I think the movement for Black Lives convening happened in Cleveland, and I think that was a really amazing reflection of folks who came together. It was about 1,500 Black folks from all over the world, Dominican Republic, Canada, South, all of us. And one of the things I think we spent a lot of time on was, you have Black folks, but then, we come with our own different identities and different class, all these different things, but how do we bring that into a space and are able to build relationships beyond the shared race that we have? And I think it was really great because there were moments of struggle where we struggled politically together, and I think it's because many folks had been, we all knew we came here with a purpose. We grounded ourselves in the principles of Black Lives Matter around all lives matter, and what does that mean and what does that look like? And I think because there were relationships that have been built over the last few years, many folks know each other, from showing up and supporting in Charleston, or when folks went to Baltimore or Ferguson, and people have worked together in different capacities, even online, meeting some of the folks that you're like, oh my gosh, I follow your Twitter, whatever, and so I think that was a really great example of folks who were willing to move beyond just the basic conversation and actually say, yes, we have some shared interests, but we also have some fault lines that we need to actually figure out how to work together to strengthen our movement and be able to, move some larger strategies together,
So Mary, I copied a statement that was made by the AFL-CIO entitled "A Year After Ferguson, the Fight for Racial Justice Continues." And of course, Michael Brown's mom, Leslie McSpadden, is a member of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. And we've had a series of programs here now on the Labor Forum, really trying to delve into the critical necessity of organized labor and the working class movement in general to not just sit on the sidelines of this issue, but to really recognize how these issues are interconnected between racial equality, liberation, economic justice, and all forms of justice. So I wanted to quote a little bit from this article and ask you to comment on it. So the statement reads, when the people in a town like Ferguson erupt into protests over racial disparities, the layers of inequity leading to that moment are generations in the making. Over the years, police forces across the United States have been increasingly militarized, public education has received less and less funding, and attacks on voting rights have created a voting base that lacks the information they need about jobs, housing, and raising wages for all, not just the wealthy few at the top. It goes on to say, as we continue to honor the memory of Michael Brown 1 year on, we must also continue to have face-to-face conversations. We need to commit to be out in our communities, breaking the isolation and fighting back against racism and solidarity. The article, or the thing, had talked about how groups like Black Lives Matter movement and the Not One More, which is a immigrant rights movement, have to be, the exact line is, labor remains supportive of the movement and has joined in on the work. If you don't mind, I mean, I know that that song and the Black Lives Matter movement, certainly address the issues of poverty, no jobs, low wages, and have made a connection, in particular with the Fight for 15. And if in the last couple of minutes that we have of this program, when we're looking forward to where the Black Lives Matter movement and the fight against racist state violence goes, if you could reflect a little bit about who you see and where you see the best alliances, or the most, and how those alliances could actually be made real and not just words on paper or even nice thoughts.
Yes. Well, some of my thoughts, I think when it comes to labor and the movement for Black Lives Matter, I think that there's definitely some opportunities with the Fight for 15 campaign. Most of that work is being led by young black, working class and poor people. And those are our people. And those are the ones that are getting profiled as they head to work and as they leave work. And so it's necessary that we continue to forge those conversations. And a lot of the Fight for 15 workers actually mobilized to Cleveland in order to begin some of more of those conversations to happen on a national level. Indeed, there's definitely local conversations that happen here in Atlanta, and I know that Fight for 15 in Charleston is also working collectively with the shoremen and our folks there, what have you. I think that there's some opportunities, and I'm trying to I can't share all my opinions, but I do think that, we have to just be really honest about where labor, big L, labor is positioned right now. I think, a lot of folks had been asking, I think since Mike Brown was killed, a lot of the labor unions are made up of police unions and police unions. And so what does that mean? And I don't think it necessarily creates a divide, but I do think labor with the big L has to make that decision and ask themselves which side are they on, because there is, a need for folks to see labor take a stand, specifically for the folks who are fighting for, the Fight for 15 and those who make up, who are actually paying dues, paying members. A lot of them are black women, who are oftentimes mothers, and victims themselves of police violence and murders. And so I think labor has some questions there also to struggle with. But I do think there are some opportunities to coordinate some actions, to see where we can make some interventions regarding, how we shut down, I'm all about shutting some stuff down, so where can we strike, where can we, really make an economic impact on systems in America and in the workforce that actually could impact and change, our conditions. And I think, the Fight for 15 folks are just the ones to do it. The Black Lives Matter crew is the ones to do it, and all those who are in support of that. And so, yeah, I think I do think labor has a little bit more searching to do or determining how they navigate that, because we know police unions are make up a big part of labor.
I would say they don't really make up that big a part of labor, and I want to just give you two encouraging things. Of course, on the West Coast, the ILWU actually shut down the ports in support of the fight against police brutality and terror. And I also want to say that a UAW local in California has actually sent a resolution to the labor councils in their area that they in fact should expel or not have police associations be identified with the labor movement because of the fact that police are used to actually break strikes and hurt working class people.
That's awesome.
So that's just something we're going to talk about a little bit more here on the Labor Forum in coming months. So in the few minutes we got left, we want to give some information both about how people can get in contact with SONG and with the Black Lives Matter movement here in Atlanta.
And the Free from Fear.
And we didn't go there.
Okay, I'll go really fast. Well, here in Atlanta, SONG has been moving its Free from Fear campaign, and we have been looking at the municipal court as a site of violence and state violence. We know that many people are being racially profiled and then get all these horrendous tickets. That is, if you make it out of police custody alive, and then if you can't pay, you end up being on privatized probation, and they're making tons and millions of money every year, and our folks are having to choose whether or not, to pay their bills or, buy food in order to meet the demands of the high traffic fines and fees. And so we envision in Atlanta in a world where, fines and fees are based on income, and where folks who can't afford the fines and fees, that they can get dignified community service, and that failure to appear warrants will be ended altogether. And that's some of the scheming we've been doing. And in order for folks to get involved, folks can email me, mary@southernersonnewground.org, and I'd be happy to share out any information around the Black Lives Matter movement in Atlanta and what's that looking like, and also Southerners on New Ground.
Thanks so much, Mary Hooks.
Thank you,
With
Mary.
a song on Black Lives Matter. And that concludes our program today for the Labor Forum on WRFG. Please, please, please do go ahead and make a donation if you found this conversation interesting, informative, and help change your mind about some things. That's WRFG.org. We'll be back again next Monday with Gary Washington.